It's time to explore the world according to Glenn. I'm Kevin Jacobsen. Glenn Close is my favorite actress, and this show is all about exploring the career of one of the finest actors of her generation. Each episode, I'll be joined by a guest as we dive into one of Glenn's movies, TV shows, or stage productions, going chronologically through her career, discussing her performance, and assessing the project itself. And today, we're talking Glenn's starring role in the 4th season of The Shield.
Time nominee Glenn Close, motherfuckers.
My guest today is a contributing writer at Gold Derby who has podcasted with me many times, including on this very show, to talk about Glenn's guest performance on The Simpsons. Now he's back to talk about more of Glenn on television. I guess he's my official Glenn TV correspondent now. Welcome back, Charlie Bright.
Great to be here.
So great to have you back here. But before we talk about Glenn on The Shield, I do know your relationship, of course, to Glenn Close, because we discussed that already on your first episode. So now, instead of going to the past, we're going to look a little bit to the future here, and I will ask you to put on your casting director cap here and say, if you had the power to cast Glenn in a future film, what are we looking at? What's the genre? What's the vibe?
I was thinking about this, and I kind of want it to be the same. Doesn't have to be exactly the same, but I want it to be the same vibe as Lily Tomlin in Grandma. I think Glenn would eat that role up. But she also has to do a lot more weed smoking, and she actually has to be smoking weed during all the takes.
Well, Glenn is nothing if not a committed actor, so she would definitely do that. Do you want to describe a little more for the listener, if they haven't seen Grandma, what the vibe is?
So Grandma was a 2015 movie starring Lily Tomlin. She plays an aging woman whose longtime lover has just passed away. And her granddaughter, who she's kind of estranged from, played by very young Julia Garner, comes to her to get help in getting an abortion. Right. And so she is using her resources, and you basically see her as a badass, and she's just awesome. And then there's these really sweet scenes with Sam Elliott. They have these wonderful scenes together. Yeah. And then you also get Marcia Gay Harden as her estranged daughter. It's just a really wonderrul movie. I was very happy that Lily Tomlin at least got a Golden Globe nomination. Yeah. And I think, that kind of like badass grandma, or like maybe a fighting librarian who's fighting censorship. I think she would be something like that. I would pay to see Glenn do that yesterday.
Yes, that kind of feisty, taking on the man, take no prisoners kind of role that is not unlike what we're going to talk about today.
Right.
It is one of her many specialties, this kind of flavor. But yeah, I would love that. I think she would get a nomination for that. So that's good in my book. Whether she wins, who knows? But listen, I would love that kind of role for her. So this is a very special episode for you all today, because we are going to be covering a full season of television in just one episode. We are discussing the 4th season of The Shield, which is a cop drama that aired on FX from 2002 to 2008. The show follows Vic Mackey, played by Michael Chiklis, a corrupt detective working for the Los Angeles Police Department as part of a team that polices the streets of the fictional Farmington district, which is rife with gang violence and prostitution, among many other criminal activities. So Vic Mackey is part of a strike team within his division, which is sort of an unofficial alliance of officers who let's just say, go to extremes to bust criminals. They torture, they tamper with evidence, things of that nature in order to accomplish their goals. They even skim money wherever they can. So, yeah, others on the force include a pair of by-the-book detectives, Claudette and Dutch. There's also Captain Aceveda, who leaves his post after 3 seasons where he is successfully running for city council. So anyway, the series was a pretty solid hit. Not a blockbuster per se, but its first episode broke records for FX, and it won a surprise Emmy in its first season for Michael Chiklis, which helped it gain more visibility. So the series was plugging along, and then from what I was reading from this oral history from Entertainment Weekly about The Shield, the chairman of FX at the time, John Landgraf, said, we had problems where the ratings fell off considerably in season 3 and entered a trajectory that likely would have yielded a cancellation. We thought about bringing in a movie star and identified Glenn Close to play the new captain. She gave us a boost that allowed us to get to the end. So yeah, Glenn's casting here was essentially an effort to gain some new viewership, and it actually did pay off. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But for Glenn, she was a bit hesitant to take on this role at first, as she also says in her oral history. She said, "My agent said, you have to take this meeting. And I said, I don't want to do television." TV was still a poor cousin to feature films, but the producers came to my apartment, and I don't think I'd even seen the show, but John Landgraf made me curious and want to proceed. He is very articulate about his philosophy on how you nurture and support creative minds. So anyway, yes, she had to be convinced to do it, but she was up for the challenge. So the 4th season of The Shield finds the strike team kind of in disarray after various events of the previous seasons, and following Aceveda's leaving his job as captain, Captain Monica Rawling, played by Glenn, is brought in to lead the force. She's tough as nails, and she's ready to take on crime with a new plan involving asset forfeiture, so essentially seizing properties and other assets thought to have been bought by drug money. So she implements this operation, and she enlists Vic to help lead the effort, even though she knows of his morally questionable reputation, but she sees how she can use that to her benefit. Unfortunately, the plan gradually falls apart when innocent people are kicked out of their homes, and there's a raid on a church that causes public backlash, and she's going up against a criminal mastermind named Antoine Mitchell, played by Anthony Anderson, who tries to outsmart her in the police's efforts and weaponize their efforts against them. So yeah, after 2 police officers are killed, she goes on the warpath to find who's responsible. So that's kind of her general arc. Of course, there are other storylines going on here that we may touch on, but for our purposes, that is the arc of Glenn as Monica Rawling. So, having said all that, Charlie, I would love to know your relationship to The Shield as a series, then and now, and your thoughts on this season and this big addition of Glenn here.
When I go down my list of shows that I think are my favorite of the 21st century, there's usually like a solid group of shows that I have juggling for like the 2 to 5 or 6 position. Then that's like Twin Peaks: The Return, BoJack Horseman, Happy Endings, and Breaking Bad. But I always find myself putting The Shield at number 1.
Wow.
It is my personal favorite show of the 21st century, and one of the best things on I also do a podcast with our other former Gold Derby colleagues, Rob LaCurria and Tony Ruiz, and we do a top 5 list at the end of every one. And one we did before the Golden Globes was our top 5 favorite Golden Globe wins that didn't pan out at the Oscars or the Emmys. And my number 1 was The Shield winning Best TV Drama at the Globes. Mm-hmm. I think this show is unbelievably tragic, and the way the arcs that these characters have, especially, and what was interesting about watching this was because I hadn't watched it since I first saw it in my regular watching of The Shield. So watching this season, knowing how the show resolves itself, really gave it another layer for me and made me think, oh, Sean Ryan knew where his end goal for the show was, and was starting to drop the clues and the seeds of storylines that would end up shaping later seasons. And I remember when it was first announced that Glenn was going to be on The Shield, and I was thinking, really, Glenn Close? Okay, like I didn't think anything about a movie star doing TV. I was just like, how could they? I know, and it's also you also think of when TV shows bring in a new character, and especially if it's someone played by someone who's so high profile,
Right.
usually, it can be sometimes, it's almost sometimes the death knell. Like it's desperation.
Mm.
But with this, they took the opening that was created from Aceveda leaving his captain position, played by Benito Martinez, and bringing in this captain and really having Vic Mackey having this totally new relationships because he was always at odds with Aceveda in seasons 1 through 3. He was always the thorn in his side, and it was very interesting to see Glenn come in and try to work with Mackey and use him, and also bringing back elements. Basically, she reassembles the strike team with Shane, played by Walton Goggins, and Lemansky, played by Kenneth Johnson. Really brings that team back together, and really is just incredible television. Fantastic television.
Yeah. Well, for me, I have a very different relationship because, as I was telling you beforehand, perhaps surprisingly, perhaps not, I had never seen The Shield prior to this week. It's just not something that ever interested me per se. Like, I'm not huge on cop shows.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. And that's the thing about
Yeah,
it. It is,
yeah.
I found myself very. I remember when I first saw it. It was the second season premiere. Was after Michael Chiklis had won that Emmy, that caught so many of us by surprise.
Yeah.
In fact, actually, that year I was rooting for Michael C. Hall, and so when they opened the envelope and said the Emmy goes to Michael, I was like, and then
Oh.
and Chiklis came, and then I was like, wait, what?
Whomst? Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
But
That's so
and
funny.
the second season started, and so
Yeah.
within like the first 5 minutes of the show, I realized, okay, this is not going to be your normal procedural cop show. This is a
Right.
very different show, and this is when the idea of the anti-hero was still very much in its infancy. Tony Soprano had been around for only about maybe 3 or 4 years at that point. We still hadn't gotten Don Draper and Walter White and
Right.
Barry and like Omar on. Well, actually, The Wire did premiere that year, so that was the
Yeah.
same year as The Wire.
Sure.
But so it was still this very, very untested thing, and I just remember being completely blown away by it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm the same way. I'm usually not someone for cop shows,
Right.
but this one was something different, and
It's different.
it was gritty.
Mm-hmm.
It was shocking. It was raw. It was violent.
Yeah.
But I think, and it's a show that I was hooked on it, and it's a show that's actually aged surprisingly well.
Mm-hmm. I agree. For me, like it was only like Brooklyn Nine-Nine is just like I love that because it's fun and goofy and different. But
Exactly, yeah.
just perhaps to stereotype a little bit, the kind of hyper masculine energy is just, I guess, also not something that really appealed to me to start with. I can tell you though, my research going into this before I watched this fourth season, I did watch the pilot, which I thought was very gripping, and the way that it ends very famously with Vic Mackey killing a fellow cop that he suspects of kind of like being a rat. I can imagine how shocking that was in 2002. It still is kind of shocking how it plays out, and it feels like a great thesis for the series to show like this is not your grandma's good guy cop show. This
It's not,
is
and it's not even NYPD Blue,
right.
which was pushing the bound,
Sure.
which had just concluded. I think it was,
Yeah.
and was really thought of as like a pushing the boundary show.
Right. So I mean, this is really, like you said, an anti-hero at best, arguably a bad person that you're following, and
No question.
yeah, and the show is kind of daring you to follow him anyway. So yeah, I watched that and thought it was really compelling. I read like summaries of the rest of the season, plus season 2 and 3. Then I watched the season 2 premiere just to see how it changed a little bit. Then I watched the season 3 premiere, and then I watched the season 3 finale. I felt like that would be a good like vibe for how the show evolves. And
Yeah, I think so.
yeah, which I'm very glad I did that, because I definitely would have been a little lost on a lot of the like character relationship motivations beyond the procedural cop stuff. But yeah, I felt like I had a good handle on it. But before I get into Glenn, like, even though this show, like I said, wouldn't normally be my thing, I did find myself really fascinated by a lot of the ideas explored here, with like obviously how difficult these jobs are and having to make these quick judgment calls that are life and death in many ways, and how it's really not sanitized at all. I think you can look at it on the surface and think, oh, maybe this kind of is glorifying that line between cop and criminal. And, people throw around words like copaganda to describe all cop shows, which I think this really is actually riding the line well of showing the full complexities here and showing how some cops do have the best of intentions to get violent people off the street or people who are really corrupting their community, but also showing there's a lot of moral gray area that they get into here where like we're assessing people or interrogating them and then showing also these truly despicable people who kind of give cops a bad name. So to me, watching it felt so multifaceted,
And it also goes into the culture as well, which I think
Right.
is something that had been that I think
Yeah.
what a lot of people would say, stuff that they would term propaganda sort of glosses over.
Right.
And I think it really went into that very, very well.
Yeah, and it's showing how cops are as fallible to go down a dark path as some of the people they are arresting, if not more so. So I think that was revolutionary at the time, especially airing in like this, post 9/11 world where there was probably like more of a desire to unite behind our institutions, like especially the police. Like this is really kind of countercultural in that way.
Well, that's interesting that you said that because I found this interview. I was when I was browsing some stuff about the show. I found this interview that the Television Academy did with Michael Chiklis, and they shot the pilot before 9/11, and and Sean Ryan, the creator, faced a very serious dilemma about whether to continue with this show after 9/11, especially with how police officers and first responders were being rightfully lionized.
Right.
But apparently Sean Ryan, that just it very quickly he felt that it was the right move to do.
Yeah. And I'm glad he did stick to his guns there. But for Glenn, like I said, I only watched those 4 episodes before season 4, so I definitely don't have a full picture as much as you would, but she felt like such a breath of fresh air, like this really great, like this sense of integrity is suddenly introduced to the force. From what I understand, she was by far the biggest name to appear on the show by that point. I could be
by
wrong.
far,
but
yeah. I mean,
especially in a major role
Chiklis
like
was
this.
known.
Yeah.
Chiklis was known for TV. He had previously been known for a cop comedy actually called The Commish before in the 90s. And CCH Pounder was a fairly known character actor. She had gotten a couple Emmy nominations by this point. And so for someone of that stature in 2005 to come to find a home on television was really something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to the point of co-leading the show with Michael Chiklis, like I think there could have been a real issue, maybe even of her. This sounds rude, but overshadowing her co-stars with her presence or feeling out of place. Because up to that point, Glenn had come to be known as a very serious actress, but also kind of like in the theatrical tradition more so than for like gritty realism per se, if you know what I mean. Like, so I think there was a real risk here, honestly.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I would understand some people feeling skeptical, as you probably were at the time, that they could make it work and not have her feel a little bit miscast. But I think it really worked out. Like, this is really a return to Glenn in a role of authority, like she had sort of done in Air Force One or Serving in Silence, like someone who is like deeply professional and tough and assertive and willing to make those decisions. And even just her body language, her presence, that kind of clenched jaw she has at times, and her posture and the blue collar sort of attitude, some of that could have felt a little phony, honestly, especially for a big respected actress like this. But I do think she makes it all pretty believable.
Yeah, I think she does that, but she also, I think, and this is, I think, to her credit and why you would get someone like a Glenn Close for this role, you can tell that she's also someone who has had to weather her own battles, being a woman in a position of authority in the LAPD. And even though they kind of talk about some things from her past, she just brings that she's able, because of her acting skills, to bring that aura of those battles that she has fought.
Yes, that's exactly right, because there is a quality to her performance that implies she has really put in time and knows how to get along in a traditionally male environment. Like, she knows how to politic with people and get them to do what she wants. And I think she's also gotten to a place of full self-awareness. She knows she is a woman in this environment, but also that's not going to stop her. And she's not even really going to call attention to it very much. She is just here to do her job and stay consistent in her values. And Glenn actually has a really great quote about this, again, from that oral history I read, where she says she spoke with Teresa Shortell, who she says at that point was the only female commanding officer in New York City. And what she asked was, what's most difficult about this job for you? And Teresa said, being a woman and not letting it matter. And she says she told me to strengthen her image as a commanding officer. She wore her uniform all the time, even though she didn't have to. So I think that's a very interesting layer here that isn't directly explored, but I think is certainly implied in her performance and in the writing in a very subtle way, and not in like an overtly preachy way, you know?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I love how she's the kind of actress that can just bring that kind of aura to her performance. It kind of reminded me of, I know I always go back to this performance because I'm really obsessed with it, but like Alfre Woodard in Clemency, she
Yes.
brings that aura of the past battles that she's had to fight. And we'll also CCH Pounder does this with her performance as well as Claudette. She's always been a personal favorite of mine on this show.
Right.
And I will say the one thing that I felt a little bit disappointed in is I wish there were more fireworks. There were more scenes, maybe one or two more scenes of fireworks between Glenn Close and CCH Pounder, because when you have actresses of that caliber with each other, you want that kind of thing.
Right. Especially because they're both willing to go there if they need to. Yeah,
Yes.
Actually, I agree. I sensed the tension kind of bubbling in that first half of the season, but I feel like it kind of peters out a little bit by the end.
Yeah, when they're no longer on the DA shit list. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. So just to talk a little bit first about her first episode, and then we can kind of talk vaguely about the rest of the series or the season. I love how we're seeing how she's just ready to get out on the street. I feel like you're sensing how she's ready to get her hands dirty, and she knows how to talk to these guys in a very common sense way, but also is commanding authority. But it's like she's not like a hard ass per se, like as you might expect maybe from a Glenn character at this time. And we get those little indications of her past, saying like she was heading up domestic abuse for a while, and that's going to come into play later in the series where she tackles a case with foster care workers. But the way he even like makes a kind of shitty comment about like them not really making much progress on that front in that first episode, she sort of stoically says like, I did what I could, and is just, I find she really makes a very strong impression. And I think it's also very meta for me in the sense that like, here's Glenn coming into this very well-established show in its fourth season, just as Monica is also entering a new environment, and she wants to get on their level while still making an impression and, getting shit done. And so I do really like the sort of layers of this. I think she also has another quote that I found here where, I don't know how you feel about this too, but like the way that she is introduced, how she doesn't actually take full command until the third episode. Like,
Yeah.
she's kind of just hanging around for a little bit.
Yeah, and you get a sense of like as much as like, because at that point you're kind of like you want to see Acevedo taken down a peg, and it is kind of funny having his replacement being this constant presence in his final days, almost like he doesn't matter anymore to a certain degree.
Yeah. And she said the writers and producers were really smart because it was only in my third episode that I took command. So me as the actress going into that company that were so close and mostly guys, me as the character had a chance to suss out the situation and observe and then take command. That was just genius for me. So yeah, I think in many ways, I feel like they just kind of made her comfortable. And also, I don't know, I think they just felt like they had to step up a little bit, having someone of Glenn's nature in the cast now and give her the good material and allow her to find the right grooves for how to play the character, and to have that dynamic that is different from Aceveda and Vic, to have them be kind of more loose allies. I think that was probably very refreshing for viewers, I would imagine. Like, I don't know about,
Oh,
can you speak to any about like the fan response to Monica?
well, I can't because I can't say that I was like engaged in like message boards or
Sure.
things back then, but I do remember it being very well reviewed, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
remember and as I've gone through fan reactions on Reddit to people, whether they're recounting seeing it for the first time or watching it for the first time now, actually being very basically on the same level as you, like very pleasantly surprised at how they handled inserting a new character and everything that she brings to it, and
Mm.
and really making that character as wonderfully complex and multifaceted as the other characters on the show. She's not just a straightforward archetype. She is
Yeah.
very complex with all of her own things. And I think they also did this by also introducing, and we'll probably get into this a bit later, but also introducing the new character of Antoine Mitchell, played by Anthony Anderson, which
Yeah.
was, oh my God. That is something I still look back at that. And I remember watching this going, I had no idea Anthony Anderson had this in him.
Yeah.
I mean, I still mainly at that time knew him from Kangaroo Jack, for Christ's sake. And so to see him in this role as terrifying a character as that, and him really just and play it with all the right notes. I think those two new additions were introduced just immensely well.
Yeah, we can talk about that now, actually. I love that storyline with Anthony Anderson as Antoine Mitchell, this drug dealer from the early 90s who went to prison and now he's out after like 13 years and is kind of seems like he might be starting up his empire again at the beginning of the season. And the feeling I get, even just from watching the first episode, is like, these writers are clearly having so much fun with these two forces here in Glenn and Anthony, and their characters have such formidable presences played up against Vic Mackey, who is himself so domineering. But it's like, it's so fascinating to watch him with people who are like equal or greater in force at times. So, yeah, I really love that choice that she's making, and like when she's even talking to Antoine, of playing it so even keeled but focused and loving having control. It's very much like, this isn't maybe an odd comparison given what this show is, but like it's a kind of a Meryl in the Devil Wears Prada thing where it's like,
Yeah, no,
even when she's talking to Antoine, it's like very like calm but forceful, like, make us come
and
after
I,
you, we'll get you.
Yeah, well, I think that was such an interesting choice by Sean Ryan to
Mm.
have those characters actually be meet each other face to face in the premiere of that season,
Mm-hmm.
which I really think just sort of sets that tone
Yeah.
brilliantly. And I think that's where you really, and I think I think I hope for viewers, because the way I found it, the way that first meeting between those two, and also having Michael Chiklis as Vic Mackey there, I think for a lot of viewers, we felt, okay, we're in good hands here, and we're ready to go on this journey with these new characters.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to talk also, just like I said, broadly about the rest of the season. We can't really stop down on every single episode because that'll take forever. But
Yeah.
we get this interesting thread with Aceveda trying to sabotage Vic Mackey a bit before he goes to his city council position, and is effectively
Mm-hmm.
warning Monica Rawling about don't trust him, essentially, which she
Mm-hmm.
then relays that bit back to him. I think because she's feeling like he's not being entirely honest about his motives here. And she senses that he's maybe trying to tie up some loose ends, but I also think she sees Vic Mackey as like this potential attack dog in a way for her, who will get results even if it's going to be messy, and things are not going to be perfect, but he is going to like It's kind of just like she's like turning on the shark and just like letting him go.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah. Seeing him as that attack dog, kind of in the same way that Acevedo did, but saying, "I want to use that as an asset."
Yes. Actually, to this point, since you just said asset, what do we think about her her operation here, her big plan to do the asset forfeiture?
I think that's one of the most interesting. I think that's one of the things that actually makes her character so, because you do see that she really wants to invest in the community, but doing so through asset forfeiture is such a dicey thing,
Yeah.
and we've seen how that's been. Again, this that's what this show does by showing the complexities of the culture of policing. It really shows that this is a very dicey territory, and it's, even though it can yield positive result and can yield positive resources being put back into the community, it's something that has a lot of sometimes, I guess, I don't know if they're unintended consequences, but definitely indirect consequences that can rub a community the wrong way.
Right. I mean, there's that speech when she's taking command in the third episode of, like, at first she's kind of clumsily stumbling through a prepared speech before just being like, I'm going to toss away the cards and kind of speak to you frankly about all this, and like trying to differentiate the criminals from the citizens, and how she wants to like divide the money from the assets, not just to the department, but like back to the city, and invest in things to make things safer. And it's like she has good intentions, but it also feels a little bit like this classic scenario where like a new person comes in and they have all these new ideas, but maybe they don't always have the best lay of the land, or like hasn't really worked out exactly how they intend to make this work, or even frankly whether it will actually lead to less crime. And so immediately I would say it's kind of a shit show where like
Yeah,
two kids are basically tossed out on the street with their mother because of it, because and she's like, well, this is not the best start. And it kind of shows on her face that there is a little bit of like annoyance and a little bit of guilt, but she can't really let it show too much. She still believes it'll work out in the long run. So I just kind of love watching her face throughout the season as she gradually realizes like this shit is not working. Like,
yeah,
and I'm
yeah.
trying to salvage it, but it's just like, it's like going in quicksand at this point. The more she kind of goes through it, the more she's just going to keep going down.
Oh yeah.
I love the scene though in that third episode too, where this mother who was tossed out on the street because they seized her home is yelling at Monica and like questioning how she could do this. And I don't know, there's just this really kind of insidious sense of like collateral damage there, where it's like Glenn is just trying to remain kind of stony faced, even as this woman questions, like, are you even like a mother to even relate to what I'm talking about here? And Monica's just like, 6 people are dead because of this gang war that this woman's son is involved in. And so like, at least you still have him.
And she also, it shows, she has the courage of her convictions, in that,
Mm-hmm.
she says, I'm going to implement this plan, and she's going to stick to it. And it hits that huge speed bump in that episode, but it also shows, her, it may be commitment, it may be stubbornness, but that she sticks to something.
She sure does. Yes. And I appreciate also that she doesn't try to like sand off the edges of the character to be super like well liked per se by the audience. I mean, I think there's an appreciation for her as a character, but she doesn't try to make her more sympathetic, I suppose, because Glenn has rarely done that in her career, as we know. So she loves playing those villainous roles, and she likes being hated by the audience. I don't think the audience hates her per se, but she's showing her to be a very complex human being who is very stoic in her beliefs, and that's just the end of it. Like even when she's in like going into the community for a town hall and like is asking for suggestions from the community, I think she she means it. She really does want to make this work and she's trying to get along with them, but there's also a little bit of it that like reeks of condescension, to be honest, like at the same time of being like, well, you help us, we no bad ideas here.
And what I think is so brilliant about that is that it creates that opening for Antoine Mitchell to come in
Yeah.
and fairly or unfairly make them the antagonists to the community and
Right.
allow him to work his way back up into that power structure.
Yeah, plus we have Aceveda there at the town hall kind of undermining her to get public support, which is so slimy. Even if you may agree with him, like it's just so slimy.
At that point, it was part and parcel for Aceveda because we were so
Yeah.
used to him trying to fuck over Vic Mackey. So it was viewers. We were like, oh yeah, no, that's
Yeah, that
classic
tracks.
Aceveda.
Right. There's also an interesting thread of how she's sort of picking up on how some of the black officers on the force are not liking this operation and is like trying to mitigate the damage a bit and assure them, like with Julian, for example, like suggesting he help like set up a defense fund or whatever for those who were wrongfully targeted. That is sort of a feeling like, I understand your concerns, but also like I'm not going to stop. Like this is my plan and this is how it is. And it's too late now. I'm not just going to end this, but it also leads to a rather unforced error, I would say, in that episode too, where she leads a raid on a local church, having been tipped off about it by, I think, Shane, that like there's drugs being hidden there by local dealers. And there's so much backlash in the community because it's like, if you can't safely worship in your community without being targeted, then where can you feel safe? And even though she knows how shitty this looks, like when she's there and realizes like they can't just wait it out until services are over because then there's time for them to flush the drugs, but like she has to commit to what she started and it's just about getting the job done. It's like this sort of lesser of two evils, and I think you're really feeling the bit of the mounting pressure of realizing she's kind of losing the public support here.
Which is so crazy because the raid does show that drugs were being
Yeah.
funneled through the church. It does
Yeah.
show that. So you would think that would be a success, but they're able to also, they doctor the video to show
Yeah.
this that has everyone screaming, and then of course you have Mackie with that smile as
That
he's taking
shit-eating
one guy
grin.
down.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's coming out right when YouTube was coming into our consciousness, and so it's that whole thing of those viral moments.
Exactly. So it's tough. And then we get to episode 7, which is her Emmy submission called Hurt, which I want to talk about because I think it's definitely probably her best episode of the season, where we're continuing the storyline of this disastrous church bust. Like you said, the tape, which is doctored, but her kind of simmering is turning into a boil by this point, I think, because she feels like she's being sabotaged, really, and that like then the organized crime unit is assigned to the case, so like it's a mess. And then
Yeah, it's the classic cop show of who's in charge here? I am. Not anymore. You're not.
Exactly. Yes. But then we have this case of the week too, where Monica is taking on this incident of this foster girl being near death outside of her foster home, and she's looking into who on the staff might have been negligent in allowing this to happen. I do love the scene where she is kind of dressing down the care worker at the station for letting one of his kids slip through the cracks and going missing. The way she just goes on a rant about how like, she used to be on domestic cases involving these kind of care situations, and she's seen up close how they can be. Like there's this like again the boiling kind of fury.
Well, and I love how it's one of those great Glenn monologues that shows that this is the one that, like, this is something that is like her Achilles heel.
Yes.
Like those types of cases. So we get to see this other facet of the character that she's seen foster care failures, and that's something that really sets her off. That really gets to her. And even in all her years in the police department, that's something that really gets under her skin, and that we see that with the way that she dresses down
Mm-hmm.
the foster care worker, who you kind of feel like also is also it's a winless situation because it's we all know that foster care is drastically underfunded, and it's just it's something that just by its nature so much stuff does slip through the cracks, and you do feel like there are people that are really trying the best that they can, and especially with the caseworker that has so many that you must imagine has so many cases going on
Right.
that you kind of feel for her at the same I feel for that worker at the same time, but at the same time you're also going, no, you allowed this thing to happen, and you're also possibly as we get further along the season, you're letting it continue.
No, I love that scene. The way she just like doesn't break her gaze as she's staring at him. It's very stirring. Just that sort of righteousness. And yeah, she really is also standing her ground against Acevedo when he puts the pressure on her to take Vic Mackey off the streets and to scale back the program. She's just so locked in that scene, especially. And I think for her, it's like she just really needs to believe that this can be salvaged. And she doesn't want to appear weak or admit that this plan wasn't as well thought out as she anticipated. But she also.
Did you ever get the feeling? I don't remember if she actually says anything like this, but whenever Acevedo's just around, do you ever feel like she just goes, "Don't you have a job to go to?"
There is just that sense of just like he's such a pest. Just like,
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Just always having to bother her in these things. But yeah, she doesn't want to appear weak or, so she ultimately has to cut bait a little bit with Vic for the greater good of her policy. And they have that great scene, her and Michael Chiklis, where he retorts back to her that like he thought she had a backbone. And I think we're seeing there a little bit of like, even there's tears coming to her eyes for the first time as she tells him like he was the redheaded stepchild before she got there. And I gave you power. I gave you respect. So keep your mouth shut before you lose both.
Yeah, and also but also that feeling of, she is, she's in it and she's not totally abandoning him. She specifically is trying to say this is just for appearances and just for now. But Vic
Yes,
is so used to being burned by the person in that position because of having to
exactly.
deal with Acevedo for all those years that it's understandable that he would think that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the
Right.
same time, I'm like I'm trying to yell. I'm wanting to yell at my television. She's on your side.
Right. Really. Yeah, and then we also are getting that little glimpse too into Glenn's backstory of when she's talking about her best friend growing up who had a father who used to beat her up, and she admits even that she knew what was happening at the time but that she couldn't say anything because she felt helpless. It's just this brief little moment of vulnerability that we rarely get from her, but yeah, it's definitely enough of a glimpse into why
That
these
was at the end of
cases.
the episode in the
Yes.
hospital room, right?
Yes. Yep.
And what I love about that scene is that she chose to let that guard down with Claudette, the
Yes.
other the other female detective
Mm-hmm.
in that precinct. And
Right.
it was that kind of, again, it has, both those actresses bringing the unspoken hurdles that they've had to encounter their entire career.
Yeah. It's actually really great writing, honestly, and it's great material for her especially. I mean, from there it just goes from bad to worse as we're heading into the end of the season. Like when some of their informants are murdered, and like her and Vic have to work together to figure out that whether there's some sort of mole who's tipping these guys off, which it turns out it wasn't actually related to any leaks. It's actually like this student who's getting revenge after his mother's suicide, his mother being an informant. But this also just speaks to how complicated and impossible this job is, because you're just like, you're trying to figure out motives for these things, and like Monica is so at this point so hyper focused on making sure her plan is working out that she's kind of seeing any backlash and threat to her informants or then these police being murdered as retaliation against her plan, even if it's not actually having to do specifically with that.
Yeah, but you kind of understand more why she's thinking that because of the way that those two cops were found in a house that was taken
Yes, that
for
part
that was part of
specifically.
that. So
Yeah.
yeah, you it also it kind of it puts her in that classic situation of, do I back off or do I double down?
Mm-hmm. And then it's interesting to watch Antoine really kind of mastermind this whole thing, the way he's clearly using the backlash as a smokescreen for him to kind of weaken the police force and cause chaos. But then also in that episode of the police officers being found dead, he's out of town while this whole thing is being orchestrated. And the tough part of it is that like Monica knew of his reputation before she took on this job, as we saw in that first episode. And I feel like she thought that she could orchestrate her own plan and do it somewhat honestly. But I think she may have underestimated his intelligence at the end of the day to kind of like counter a lot of her moves.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we get the interrogation too, where Monica and Vic are bring in Antoine about the murder of these officers. And that's a really fascinating sequence where she's trying to play off his prejudices, which is so nasty, but also compelling at the same time, especially when she mentions his son being in prison and how he's been having sex in prison, like consensually. But I gotta say, I just have to read this line because it's so great. The way she says, maybe if you hadn't been away doing time, maybe Junior wouldn't be in the pokey doing dick. I mean,
and credit to the writers for knowing to get for knowing that she could nail that material.
yes, but also it's like that sort of slightly mocking tone she has when she says that. That's so perfect. And that's also where Vic's finally realizing I'm out of options here because like Antoine indicates even that Shane is under his control to a certain degree as kind of a dirty cop. And, you know, Vic had been hiding a tape of Antoine confessing to killing this girl as well as ordering a hit on Vic. So he hides that from Monica, but now he's trying to get ahead of any trouble he and Shane might get into by coming clean to her. And then just that barely repressed rage from her you really feel, because by this point we've established she puts her faith in people, you know, but when they betray that trust, there's very little coming back from that. And just the fury in her eyes, it's very intimidating. You don't want to be on the other end of that.
Yeah, and it finally felt like you had someone who had more integrity going up against Mackie than Aceveda did, who as we've already established, was pretty slimy from the get-go.
Yes. I mean, yeah, he's even like Aceveda's trying to extend an olive branch, as he says, by like limiting the auctioning off of the confiscated assets to after the guilty convictions, which she's not about. Like, she's realizing it'll just go into escrow and the money won't go back into the community until years from now. So she denies that olive branch. But, you know, you can certainly see the relief when she realizes that maybe those cop killings weren't actually motivated by her seizure program. And yet, when Aceveda comes around and is still suggesting she make those modifications, that just makes her lose her patience. And she very smartly, I would say, uses his own kind of like, you know, public image, media friendly ambitions against him and snaps at him that like he can be held accountable for letting go of a female captain who was too tough on crime, you know?
Yep.
She is just one of my favorite actresses when it comes to standing up to men. Like, that's really her bread and butter. And this is a great example of that.
Yeah, it's incredible how flawlessly she works in this whole environment.
Yeah. Yeah. So by the end of the season, we're getting the revelation that the cop killings were actually facilitated a bit by Antoine's half-brother acting as like a mediator for Antoine, which is this huge victory for Monica and the team to finally get some resolution here. But then we have the dramatic irony that like this confession is followed up by Antoine being gifted a deal with Aceveda so he can cover up Aceveda's sex scandal, which we haven't gotten into, but that's...
I remember watching that episode where the assault happens and my jaw was on the floor.
Yes.
I was not prepared for that, and I was I was shocked at this that this thing was happening and was being shown on TV, and that it ended up playing this role with Acevedo, throughout the remaining seasons. It just shows that at the end of the day, most of these characters are always looking out for number one. They're
Yeah.
always, it's up at the bottom line is it always comes down to covering their own asses. I mean, we see that the havoc that this assault that Acevedo went through is taking a toll on him mentally and in the way that he is now, engaging in sexual activities and how it's manifesting there. But still, at the end, it's even though, yeah, maybe it's about, it brings in more cases and closes more cases and gets more arrests, but it's still at the end of the day him covering his own ass
Yeah.
and his own internal shame.
Mm-hmm. Which I didn't watch that part of like the actual assault. So is it like some kind of like the oral sex type of rape situation that was in a previous season?
Yeah, it was. I believe that it was season two,
Okay.
during
Yeah.
a raid on something where he was on site for it, and these two gangbangers
Mm,
corner him, and he's running for city council at that time,
right.
and one of them forces him to perform oral sex on him and takes pictures of it on his flip phone.
Right. Yeah. So obviously he wants to cover that all up, and hopes that Antoine can orchestrate the essentially the murder of his blackmailer in a sense. So, the team gets their big confession, but it's ultimately kind of like a Pyrrhic victory because they can't formally charge Antoine. I believe that's at the end of the penultimate episode. She tells Aceveda to shove it up your ass. I don't remember the full monologue, but it's a great closer.
Oh, I was actually thinking that that could have been her Emmy submission also,
Yeah,
that penultimate episode, because that has the fireworks that you want, that you kind of expect with Glenn,
right.
of her just having it and just going scorched earth.
Yeah, which she really much does in the finale too, where she's just on the warpath against Aceveda. And I just love how you can sense that she is motivated to do right by her cops, her team, but that this sort of righteous anger has built up to a point that it also kind of starts to feel like just revenge for all the cutting off at the knees Aceveda has done up to that point.
Well, you can tell it's basically it's her sowing her own undoing, basically.
Yes.
Especially when she goes after the foster home again.
Yeah.
When she goes through that, and you really just see that she's someone who that it comes across that she has the convictions. There's that stubbornness there, and as I said, she's going scorched earth, and she's like, if I'm going down, I'm taking all these idiots with me.
Yeah, she's locked and loaded. And yeah, we see her do that little plan of like having Vic and the strike team go after this drug lord who Antoine was supposedly giving up to the DEA in their deal, and that works out and she gets that win. But then the other shoe drops when the DEA chief is like enraged by all this secretive shit and like demands she resign from her job. And I love how Glenn plays that scene where she realizes she is being fired, the way she sits with it and like processes that even in this room, no one is fighting for her. She has to fight her own battle here, and realizing that her fellow boys in blue are not going to live by their little unofficial code. And she tries to argue her case of like the positive she brings to it, but they ice her out and it's very cold and she just kind of deflates. But she also doesn't let it show. She keeps it stoic until she's back in the house and finally cries to herself. But like you can tell it really hurts.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just that whole one too. Of she it feels like she's getting the win, but then of course everything else just happens on top of it, and she has this stoicism to her that's just
Yeah.
incredible. The way that she conveys all of it, and what's interesting about that is what happens immediately after that I guess he's not really undercover, but that other cop on the street goes to her about what happened with Lemansky and the unofficially confiscated heroin that he confiscated off that one guy.
Yes.
Um, that's part of the sewing that's coming with that character that comes to a
Mm-hmm.
head in the following season.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things where it's interesting how she reacts to that because she's basically like, it's not my problem anymore.
Yeah.
But it's also so that because Lemansky had always been the one member of the strike team that had anything resembling a conscience,
Mm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
or a true true sense of right and wrong, even as he would be straddling that line. And yeah, it's just one of those things that it's having known what happens in the remaining three seasons, it really is eerie
Hmm.
to watch to see that foundation being laid there. I will say that you want to talk about bringing in new characters. The following season, they bring in Forrest Whitaker as
Mm. Okay.
as an overly zealous internal affairs detective,
Sounds about right.
who just is dead set on bringing down Mackie, and it brings down this whole other
Hmm.
dynamic, and especially after bringing in some two people like Glenn Close and Anthony Anderson in this season,
Right.
the very next season to bring in someone like Forrest Whitaker,
Mm-hmm.
just really they upped the ante, but they delivered in those seasons.
Yeah. Which I'm doing the math now must have been the same year as his Last King of Scotland too.
It was, yeah, it was. And that's what made him not getting nominated at the Emmys so confounding because he was coming off of that victory. You would think like hot off an Oscar victory, the Emmys would be ready to, especially, and also they gave Glenn that Emmy nomination the previous
Yeah.
year. But yeah, that's to me is one of the biggest missteps the Emmys have ever made was not recognizing Forrest Whitaker because he's incredible in that season.
But I mean, like, for Glenn, we know that she's very good at playing these characters who are either hoisted by their own petard or, like, humiliated by a twist of fate, like these kind of things. And she just registers all that disappointment so clearly, but is just kind of like, I have to face my situation now with some level of grace, even though I'm internally screaming. She's so good at communicating all of those layers. But, and like you said, that moment of being like, that's someone else's problem now with the heroin stuff, just leaving it at that. That's just like, what else can I really do at this point? But I appreciate, and I'm sure she appreciates, that they allow for Antoine to be formally brought in and arrested before she is forced to vacate the building. At least she can sort of claim that in a way and have that resolution. And then that satisfaction when she just like clenches her jaw a little bit and just formally arrests him. It's great, you know. And that silent exchange too of recognition between Vic and Monica, I think, is perfectly played by the both of them. That shared look of like, well, this kind of fucked up, but like it is what it is, you know, her having to resign. And I think it's also a recognition that they made a good team and that they share a common sort of relentless focus. And so all they can do by that point is sort of bid each other good luck in the next chapter, wherever it leads them.
Yep, and while everybody is celebrating the capture, the whole
Hmm.
precinct is celebrating at that bar. She is forced to celebrate in absentia on her own, drinking her own beer alone in her house that she put a 6 month lease deposit on.
Yes. So an ironic little twist of fate there, and ultimately a sad conclusion for Monica. But like I said, at least she got to arrest Antoine Mitchell, so there's something there. It's just a really fascinating show, and this season I think really added an interesting layer compared to the previous three to have her come in as a new flavor of what a captain could be compared to Aceveda and have this interesting dynamic with Vic. So I think it was probably, I assume, considered a nice breath of fresh air watching this season, kind of
I
having them
def
reset the dynamics, you know?
I definitely think it was, and it also
Yeah.
I think was a good cool off period before what transpires in the following season, especially with the bringing in of Forrest Whitaker, who is
Right.
even more determined than Aceveda was to take down Mackie. So
Mm.
it was in the flow of the show, it actually flowed incredibly well.
Yeah. Well, one last thing. Just wanted to read this last quote from Glenn from that oral history. Just talked about her experience. She said, "The show broke new ground. You felt like you were on the cutting edge. It was such a great show and very important to my career," which it certainly was because she would have damages 2 years later. And,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, that set her on the motion for on television and also specifically with FX. And I think it
right.
also shows how FX when they how FX has always has since they started original programming, which really broke through with The Shield and Nip Tuck, for better or worse, it gave us Ryan Murphy.
Yes.
Um,
Mm.
uh, they have people there at FX that really care about the creative aspect of it. It's not just a business for them. They really, and so
Right.
people like John Landgraf and having people like John Solberg as their, or as Michael Chiklis said during his speech, John Solberg. Um, so I actually have an interesting, I had an interesting interaction with him when Archer, when I was a big fan of Archer, and they weren't getting nominated in animated program, and I noticed that on the Emmy ballots, I think for their fourth season, they submitted it. They didn't submit an animated series; they submitted in comedy series. And I wrote FX about that, asking that, and then I get an email back from John Solberg saying, "Hey, give me a call. Let's talk about this." And so we chatted for about
Oh my
10 minutes
God.
about the strategy there, and they were about what their strategy was. They were basically like, "Yeah, if we're not getting nominated and animated, we might as well go big or go broke, go big or go home." So
Wow.
um, yeah, they really they it makes sense that not only would this be her foray into television, but FX would carry her and bring damages into focus, and then and eventually net her two more Emmys to her mantle.
Exactly. So, yes, as she said, very important to her career. Any other things we didn't get into from this season that you wanted to mention? Do you want to do your CCH Pounder impression? Like, because you sent me that earlier and I died laughing.
I found that randomly just a couple days ago. It popped up on my TikTok feed. Yeah, what Kevin is alluding to here is I found this clip of Glenn Howerton on Always Sunny in Philadelphia doing a CCH Pounder from The Shield impression. You know, spurred up for the DA. It's like
Right.
out of nowhere, he does it. And I sent you this video of his impression and then her actually saying that line, and it is in this season.
Yes.
And
And
just
it's
and
dead on.
it's crazy how dead on it is.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's just again just one of those like great things, and I was very happy not only that Glenn got Emmy recognition, but also that CCH Pounder got that Emmy
Yes.
nomination for this. That was a really well earned nomination, and she didn't stop in that season. She ends up having one of the only happily satisfying arcs in that show because
Mm.
the rest of that, what I think makes the show, I won't go into details, but I will say I believe that by the end of the show, the arcs of the strike team are tragic on a level that I think is on par with Shakespeare or Greek tragedy. I really feel that's how well written the end of that show is, and I actually found myself revisiting some of that, some
Mm.
clips from that finale,
Mm.
which is still, for my money, best finale that I've ever seen. And it was crazy because that finale, I believe, no, it was 2 years after The Sopranos. It was I keep for some reason I keep thinking that it was the same year. It was 2 years after The Sopranos, but
Yeah.
still, that was the flavor that was left in our minds was of like finales that everyone was waiting for, and
Mm.
that one was confusing because, of course, all of us thought that our cable had gone out at the end of
Yes.
The Sopranos.
A nationwide power outage. Yes.
We, I remember we our cable box had been having issues in the lead up to that, so me and my mom genuinely thought that our cable had gone out when that
Wow.
cut to black happens. Um, but I feel like the Shield really just showed how to do that in
Mhm.
in the most amazing way possible. And it blows my mind that Sean Ryan has. I know he created a couple other shows since then, but he hasn't really had anything that stuck out the way that The Shield has. It
Mhm.
kind of blows my mind that that hasn't connected in that way.
Yeah.
But it does, but
Interesting.
it is kind of cool how, now Walton Goggins is really having a moment right now,
Oh yeah.
and it's amazing. And to me, it's amazing. The Shield was started 24 years ago, and I remember seeing him on there, going, "Who's that? Who's that uppity redneck who has the receding hairline? Is kind of
Right.
cute, also. Like."
Yeah. From certain angles, you're like, huh. Yeah. Yeah. It is just fun watching in retrospect, seeing like it's a pretty stacked cast, even if a
Oh,
lot
did
of
you
them were.
notice the appearance of Katie Sagal also?
I
As
did.
who because her husband is Kurt Sutter, who
Yes.
was a writer on The Shield and would go on to create Sons of Anarchy,
Mm-hmm.
and earn her a Golden Globe, a much deserved Golden Globe for that.
Yes.
I was secretly hoping during her acceptance speech that she would say, "I've never been so happy to be sleeping with my boss."
Yeah, I remember just being disappointed she never got an Emmy nomination for that too.
Yeah, that was. But I also, you talk about shows that didn't stick the landing. That finale was a mess.
Yeah, I abandoned that show by that point, but yeah,
You were probably right to do so.
fair enough,
By the end it was the wheels were coming off.
so to speak. Bikes. Anyway, let's get to the release of The Shield season 4. So it premiered on March 15th, 2005. And, actually, we're March 15th this very day as we're recording. So
Holy moly, yeah.
precisely 21 years ago. So congrats, The Shield season 4. You can now legally drink beer. Um, I don't know. Anyway, it aired weekly through June 14th. And here's a nice thing with Glenn's inclusion. There was indeed a ratings bump with season 4. The premiere jumped up 39% compared to season 3, which is pretty
Wow.
seismic. Yes. And Glenn's performance was very well received. Critics thought she was a great fit and an exciting little burst of energy for the show. And she helped the series get back into the Emmy conversation, like we've been saying, because she earned her 10th Emmy nomination and her first time as part of a drama series. So I don't remember actually. I wanted to ask you this, Charlie, but like, was there any question about her submitting as a lead compared to supporting, or did it feel like she was always going to be lead?
It felt like she was always going to be lead, especially because when you looked at where she was put in the credits, she was put right. Her name's put right after Michael Chiklis, and I feel like her presence did merit it. It was it was
Yeah,
it
I
was
think
it was
so.
it was proper placement.
I'd say
Um,
so.
yeah,
I was just curious.
yeah, and I do remember being just like dumbfounded when Patricia Arquette ended up winning for Medium.
We'll talk about that. Yeah, I did want to mention that. Put a pin in that.
Okay.
Yes. So yeah, got that nomination. CCH Pounder got her one and only nomination for The Shield this year in supporting actress. So a nice comeback after it had a great start for its first season. Then it got another nomination for Chickless in season 2, and then it was completely snubbed for season 3, and then getting these two acting nominations for season 4. I feel like a very unique Emmy trajectory we don't often see. But
Yeah, definitely. It was definitely a weird Emmy trajectory. And what's weird is that the quality of the show kept going up, but those were the last two Emmy nominations the
yeah,
show ever got.
and then just right, completely dropped off. But also, Glenn went on to get a Golden Globe nomination in the winter. So yeah, I think maybe some of that is just her pedigree as an actress, but it was so positively received that I think many folks agreed that she earned it. I don't think it was just a name check like you see in other instances.
Well, I also think that I think it was, we were seeing certain tropes with Glenn that we were used to, like, of course, the clenched jaw, and like, of course, like the way she cries to herself in the final episode. But we
Yeah.
were also seeing this side of her that we had never seen before, that I don't think many people had seen before or would have associated with her. And so it was this,
Yeah.
for I'm guessing for a good amount of people, was this wonderful opening to marvel at this actress's amazing abilities.
Yeah. Continuing to show more of her range. I think we've kind of peppered it out through this discussion, but did you have any other thoughts about just why you feel like season 4 was generally well liked, and maybe what it was about Glenn's presence that helped inject a little more interest back into the show again?
I think it was that different approach to Mackie, because Mackie
Yeah.
is always the central figure, and for lack of a better term, he's always the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And for someone to come in and, as I said, want to see that as an asset and say, okay, I'm going to take this, but I'm going to work with this,
Right.
um, was a refreshing view to take. And it was complex, it was fun, and it was great television.
Yeah, and I think they have phenomenal chemistry together,
They
above
really
all.
do.
Even if her plans may not have worked out and she didn't always trust him, maybe, but it feels like they were real partners in this and really on the same wavelength. And yeah, I just think it was a great dynamic, and that the writers, again, probably, felt a little bit of that good pressure to give her that good material and give the show itself, like, really step up to the plate here. I want to talk a little bit more about the Emmy race here, because she does lose to Patricia Arquette for Medium. The other nominees were Frances Conroy for 6 Feet Under, Jennifer Garner for Alias, and Mariska Hargitay for Law and Order SVU.
Interestingly, there was a contest at Gold Derby that year, and I actually won to be an amateur pundit and make Emmy predictions on for that year's Emmys.
Wow.
And I unfortunately I was predicting Mariska Hargitay was going to win, which added to my confounding of like, wait, what? Patricia Arquette, what? That
Yes.
show?
Right. I was going to say, this is pretty anecdotal, but I feel like there was definitely a perceived sense of surprise that night when she won that. Correct?
Huge
Yeah.
surprise. And also, since we're still on the Shield, also Blythe Danner's win for Huff. Although I will say, I remember when I watched the first season of Huff, and I watched her Emmy submissions are incredibly good.
Hmm.
She knocked it out of the park with. I don't know about this. I've never seen the second season of Huff. They never released it on DVD. It's this weird thing. They never got it out on DVD. But I can't argue with Blythe Danner's win because her episodes are fantastic.
Yeah. I also just feel like that show has been so lost to time compared to a
Oh,
lot of the others here.
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't see a lot of Huff discussion lately.
Which is weird because it was a good show, and I mean it starred Hank Azaria, Oliver Platt, and Blythe Danner. I mean, that is like to have that in 2005. That's incredible.
Yeah. But I looked back a little bit at some old Emmy predictions from 2005, and I was actually pleasantly surprised to see a few columns were predicting Glenn would win this. I don't know if that was the real perception at the time, but that's just from what I could find, that there was. To be honest, though, some of it was kind of rudely couched in the idea of, like, she's a movie star doing
She's the
TV.
movie
Of course
star.
she'll win. Yeah.
Yeah. I think from what I remembered, most of it was focused on we're thinking that it was either going to be Glenn or Mariska, because I believe
Yeah.
Mariska had won the Globe.
Hmm.
And she had only just gotten her first nomination, I believe, for the show the year before.
Yeah.
And Allison Janney weirdly asked her did that weird thing, bringing her up on stage. It was one of the most awkward things I've ever seen.
I know.
Um,
But she would win
uh,
the next year, though, Mariska.
she would, and
So,
unfortunately, I was hardcore rooting for Frances Conroy that year for the finale of 6 Feet Under,
yeah.
because another show that was it was so weird. The quality of 6 Feet Under is so weird and uneven,
Right.
but that finale was
Undeniable.
perfect.
Yeah.
That
Yep.
was perfect.
Yeah. It was.
I'll also never forget the reaction of I was watching the episode where, spoiler alert, Peter Krause dies, the third to last episode.
Yeah.
My mom was watching it upstairs, I was watching it downstairs, and after the episode I walked upstairs and I was like, oh my god, can you believe it? And my mom went, good,
Oh, no.
good, he deserved it.
Yeah, Nate Fisher, a bit of a divisive character, but
Yeah, he was a bit of
yeah,
a prick.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I liked him anyway. I love
Yeah.
that show. Um, but yes, I mean, not to be rude, but why did Patricia Arquette win
I
anyway?
don't know. And I remember even
Like, where
people at
did
the
that come
time
from?
going, yeah, I think she's also someone who was more associated she's not the a movie star of Glenn Close level, but
Yeah,
she was more known for movies than she was television.
true.
And I believe Medium was a ratings hit in its first season for NBC.
Yeah.
Um, but I remember that Emmys, there were so many things that if you didn't pay attention to the episode submissions, a lot of the
Mm,
wins would have probably confounded you. Like Tony Shalhoub winning his second for Monk over Jason Bateman for Arrested Development. Again, when you look at the episode submission that Tony Shalhoub, he submitted perfectly, and it made sense that he would win. James Spader winning his first
mm,
for Boston Legal, but his second consecutive one. He submitted a brilliant episode called Death Be Not Proud, where he
yeah.
argues for a death row inmate in front of the Texas Supreme Court. It's one of those ones. It brings back memories of, wow. Remember when you could really denote who would win based on episode submissions? I
Yeah.
miss those days.
Take me back.
I know, please.
Yeah,
Those
that's
years
like
when
one of those episodes that I always think about of like the perfectly calibrated Emmy submission is that episode for James Spader. That
yeah,
speechifying, it's just
we called it the David E. Kelly speeches. Then
yeah.
and the same year, William Shatner won
Mm-hmm.
one as well for that. Yeah, I do miss those years, and I do miss seeing someone like Terry O'Quinn being able to win for Lost, which was such a
Yeah.
great win.
Mm-hmm.
But then you still got ones that would confound you, like that same year that Terry O'Quinn won. Katherine Heigl win still baffles me, although I think that's one thing where she was the movie star at the time. So
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
though it should
That
have been
was
Lorraine Bracco for that, because she submitted that episode where she decides she's had it with Tony and throws him out. Love it.
yeah. Well, this Emmys from 2005 is like the big ABC revival party of
Yeah,
Desperate Housewives and Lost, where Desperate Housewives kind of flopped low key, except Felicity Huffman and directing, I think, but it didn't win series. Lost did win in drama series, so I was very invested in that as a fan of both shows at the
and
time.
and in all fairness, Lost.
Yeah,
That J.J. Abrams won his Emmy for directing the pilot of that, and Lost is still, I think, if I have to think about, I would put it along with The Shield in top 10 pilots of all time.
correct.
Um,
Yes.
and yeah, you just sort of, I'll never forget the whole mind fuck of the third season when you realize at the end of that it's a flash forward,
Yeah.
not a flashback, and just
Yes. We have
going,
to go back.
whoa,
I know.
wow. It's one of those things I miss. It's one of those things I actually like with the show, like that's going on now, The Pit. I like the week to week thing. I like
Yes.
I like that experience, and I forgot how much I missed I missed that experience.
Mm-hmm. I'm not a conservative in many things, but in terms of television, I'm always like the traditionalist with that. Like this whole binge model, not for me. So
Yeah, I can do it sometimes, but I like having that there are some shows that we do have the week to week, and
yeah,
especially a show like The Pit, I think they do it brilliantly.
right. And
I
we're all
I
watching
love
at the
that.
same time and reacting and talking about it throughout the week.
Yeah, it's the closest thing we have like to the water cooler moments now, and it's
Yep.
nice that we still have shows that can bring us that week to week. I remember um well, we were both writing for Gold Derby at the time. I think we were both on a post finale discussion of Breaking Bad with like Tom and
Wow.
Marcus.
Yeah, we
Uh,
were. I
yeah,
remember.
and
Damn.
we were enjoying that moment of
Yeah.
especially like when Ozymandias happened, and
Ugh.
we're all just like going, did we just see one of the best episodes of television ever? I think we just saw one of the best episodes of television ever.
Yeah. Wow.
My apologies to the viewers. We're just me and Kevin have just turned this into talking shop about about the old days of Gold Derby.
Take me back. Take me back to God's country.
Oh God! Remember the
Yes, but
2013 Emmys when the first award was Merritt Weaver, and I said,
oh my God.
Marcus actually looked at our email chain that all the editors had and found my email right after that happened, where I jokingly said all our predictions just went to shit, and then
It
Every
just kept
win
happening.
after that was just Tony Hale for me, Bobby Cannavale for Boardwalk Empire, Jeff Daniels for the Newsroom. What's happening?
What is who has hacked the results to give their own personal ballot? Because this is bizarre. Yeah, truly insane. What a time. And
Those were the
I'm
days.
also low key. I do miss when we would get that at the Emmys because we really don't get that anymore. So
I really feel ever so often. I feel like the two slow horses wins in
yeah, that's
writing
true.
last year, in writing 2 years ago, and then directing last year is that's like the nearest thing we've gotten to that.
Right.
And Jeff Hiller's win for Somebody
That.
Somewhere.
Wow.
Oh my,
Yes. What a
that
moment.
made me that made me so happy.
And all the gay people in his category being so thrilled for him.
Oh yeah, like Bowen and Michael being so
Yes.
over the moon for it because especially Bowen because like Bowen he comes from Upright Citizens Brigade and Bowen
Yeah.
him and Bowen have probably known each other for over a decade at that point.
Yeah.
I will say Jeff Hiller was when I got he was one of the last interviews I got to do at Gold Derby that got
Oh.
posted in its entirety, and he was also so nice. He was one of the nicest people ever. He even recorded a greeting from my mom because my mom is the one who turned me on to Somebody Somewhere. So he recorded
Oh.
a greeting for her, and she was very flattered by that.
I adore him. He's wonderful. We are so
I
far
listened to his
afield about
interview
this.
on I listened to his interview on Howard Stern after he won the Emmy, and it's very funny
Oh
how
my
he
god.
said how he has the Emmy on like on where his TV is, and he says it makes me it reinforces how small my apartment actually is.
Bless him. Only wish him the best after that. But where were we? Glenn.
Glenn, the Shield.
Yes. But yeah, anyway, she did lose this, but damages is coming, so no big loss. It's okay. Personally, though, I think I would have gone even with a Frances Conroy here. I'm so sad she never won an Emmy for 6 Feet Under, you know.
Yeah,
So,
actually, on that same list that I had the Shield of the Golden Globe wins, I gave
yeah,
the Golden Globes, and I got to give SAG big credit for rewarding Frances Conroy. She
I
was
know.
the linchpin of 6 Feet Under to me,
Yep.
and I always loved whenever we would get those little glimpses of what her character was really like, and I
Yeah.
loved that.
Love
She was so
that.
great in that show.
Mm-hmm. But also, Glenn at the Golden Globes, she lost to Gina Davis for Commander in Chief,
Oh
which
my
low
God,
key,
that's
I think is also a role that Glenn could have played, to be honest, like playing the
true.
first female president. But
I
yeah,
will say Gina Davis had one of my favorite acceptance speeches ever when she won for that. When she
yeah,
won for that, she gets up on stage and she goes, when I was on the red carpet, there was a little girl that said, because of you, I want to be president. The whole crowd goes, oh, and she goes, yeah, that didn't happen.
oh my god, I remember that. I love Gina, but yeah,
That was a great moment. That was a great
yeah,
moment. And it was weird because her Stuart Little co-star also won that evening, Hugh Laurie.
wow,
Yeah.
another one who won at the Globes but never at the Emmys. Wow.
Always had the best acceptance speeches.
Yeah. Anyway, we took some wild tangents here, but let's get to our last segment where we're going to rate Glenn's performance on a very specific scale. Thinking about her performance and where this sits in her career, would you say with her performance as Monica Rawling, she's ready for her close-up? Is it low Glenergy? Is it close but no cigar, somewhere in the middle? Or we now have new secret categories. I don't know if you knew about this, but we do
Oh, I
have.
didn't know about this.
Well, yes, we've added serving in silence, which is to say delivering a great supporting performance. I don't think that really applies here. Or gleniscent, meaning she is good, but the project, not so much.
I think it's ready for close-up level. I
Okay.
actually would put her kind of in the serving and silencing because there's that all the nonverbal
Right.
energy she brings to that character
That's true.
is is one of those things that it's one of those things that Glenn does so well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's incredible. She brought her A game. The writers brought their A game, and the whole and Chickless and everyone was firing on all cylinders, and it was a wonderful example of a new character. As I said, a new character being brought in, but it wasn't totally. It was they worked it in a way that it enhanced the story, and it made the Shield continue. It gave a great new dimension to the show, and also would end up setting the stage for the next 3 seasons that would come.
Amen. Yes. This for me is on the low side of ready for her close up, but still absolutely in that tier. I think she absolutely tears it up here and plays it as well as a actress of her stature could have, while still blending into the rhythms of the show and not standing out in a bad way. She is just really serving here. I love it. And I think with this performance and with the one she's about to give on Damages, she is showing that her fellow movie stars that like this is possible to do really good work on television and to really craft a character over the course of many hours as opposed to just a movie. So
let me ask you one other thing. This is about the Shield. What do you
okay.
think? Because I've seen message boards that make it's pretty divisive. What do you think of the show's theme?
The theme song, you mean?
The theme that plays at
Where it's
the
just like
beginning, and then again at the end
yeah.
of the show. Like, did you
Um
like it? Or I know a lot of people find it annoying. I love it.
by the time I got to the end of the season, I felt like it was just echoing in my mind, just like that screaming
Yeah.
sound. It's just like, okay, I think I'm a little bit sick of this. In terms of like watching it as a binge, it doesn't really work as well for me, but I don't know. It does have like the right energy for what the show kind of is, so it's appropriate. It's just kind of a little more abrasive than, your traditional type of theme.
I was genuinely curious because
Yeah.
that's a theme that ever since I first saw the show, it just gets stuck in my head.
Yeah.
And I also like if I want to feel like a badass when I'm walking down a hallway, I play that in my mind, you know.
Yeah. All right. Well, Charlie, thank you so much for joining me. This was actually a really fun episode with a few tangents, but I think we had a great time. So thank you so much.
My pleasure, my friend.
Well, where can people find more from you on the internet if you wish for them to find you?
You can find me on at Gold Derby. I still am an occasional contributor to Gold Derby. I'm also probably going to be doing some contributing to Awards Watch
Mm.
in the near future. And you can find me on Twitter/X at Charles Bright. And you can also find me at Awards Heaven, the Awards Heaven podcast with our other Gold Derby family, Rob LaCuria and Tony Rees. We are doing. I know this will be out after, but we're getting ready. We have a live post show for the Oscars that we're getting ready for. We were talking about it earlier. It's Oscar Sunday, and of course, I'm getting headaches over everything, especially live action short. But that's another thing altogether. And we need to end this episode.
Yes. Well, hopefully this was a good distraction from the anxiety of that. So,
Yes, it was
yes.
welcome.
Good. Well, thank you all so much for listening. You could find me at Kevin_Jacobsen on Twitter and Instagram. Just Kevin Jacobsen, no underscore on Blue Sky. You can listen to my Oscar-themed podcast, And the Runner-Up Is, for coverage of every single Best Actress race. That's And the Runner-Up Is on all platforms. And to keep up with the world according to Glenn on social, follow The Glenn Pod. Rate, review, and follow the show on all platforms. And with that, I'll bid you all adieu.